Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's live town hall meeting hosted by Douglas County. This is actually our 66th live town hall. I can't tell you, I'm so pleased and honored as a commissioner to have so much engagement from our citizens on these topics that are critically important to you. Well, we'd like to welcome all of you who showed up in person and online. Tonight's live town hall topic is based on what we are hearing from you, our citizens. You'll recall last year, right about this time, we heard from you about short-term rentals, very similar to those advertised on VRBO or Airbnb. We gathered your feedback, and now we have an update. So we also want to get your feedback tonight. Stay on the line. We will get to your questions and your comments. Commissioner Teal, will you tell us a bit about the format for tonight's call?
Absolutely, Abe. Thanks so much. So as my colleague mentioned, in February of last year, we hosted a live town hall on this topic. And most of you said short-term rentals should be allowed while balancing quality of life. And just to level set, if you live in Highlands Ranch, Sterling Ranch, Parker, Castle Rock, quite frankly, folks, this topic will not apply to you and your neighborhoods because this will only apply to the unincorporated areas of the county that are not governed by PDs or planned developments. Now, tonight we're going to talk about how we're thinking about implementing short-term rentals. And we do want to get your feedback. We want this to be very interactive. So if you would like to ask a question or give us your thoughts, press *3 on your telephone your telephone keypad, and you will be transferred to an operator who will take down some basic information. Once the operator notes your information, you'll be returned to the call and can listen to the conversation until it's your turn. So if you're listening on your phone, press *3 on your keypad now to ask a question or provide comment. If you're online, submit your question and our moderator will read it out loud. For those of you here in the room, raise your hand and we'll bring you the mic so that everyone here online and on the phone can hear your questions and comments. We know everyone has a lot of questions and we will get to those very soon. But first, I would like to turn this over to my colleague, Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, everyone. And I'd like, just like my fellow commissioners have mentioned, we're here tonight to follow up on a topic that we've been talking about for about a year. For context, we're talking about rentals for less than 30 days, a time frame that's been defined in state law. I want to also let you know that we are talking about areas in unincorporated Douglas County. So if you live in an incorporated city like Parker or Castle Rock or Larkspur or Lone Tree or Castle Pines, what we talk about tonight will not be included in the decision that we make. HOAs and planned developments may also have additional requirements. So a planned development, even though like Highlands Ranch and Sterling Ranch are unincorporated, when they were built, they were planned as what's called a planned development. So they have requirements about what can and cannot happen there. So what we decide here might not apply to a planned development like Highlands Ranch, like it would for other parts of unincorporated Douglas County. So based on your feedback, let's get started. Roger.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. Again, as a reminder, please press *3 on your telephone keypad and you'll be transferred to an operator who will take down some basic information. Since we would like to hear from as many people as possible, we'll ask you to limit yourself to only one question or a short comment. When it's your turn, I will call your name and ask you to repeat that question for our live audience. As Commissioner Teal mentioned, you can also participate online. Visit douglas.co.us/town hall. And for those of you that are live here in our hearing room, we'll have a segment and be calling on you as well. Just raise your hand when it's that time and we'll come over and let you make your comment. So let's go back to Commissioner Layden now. Go ahead, Commissioner.
Thank you, Roger. Let's start with a bit of background, and I'd like to introduce Steve Koster and Mike Carey, our Assistant Director of Planning Services and Zoning Enforcement, respectively. So for you guys, what's the summary of what we're talking about tonight?
Sure, Commissioner Layden. This is Michael Carey, Zoning Compliance Manager. Steve Coster actually was not able to join us tonight, so you just get me. So what we're talking about,
That's great.
as already described, is we're talking about rental periods of less than 30 days of a residence in the county. Right now, there's very limited options for that type of rental in the county. We've got one or two planned developments that do allow for short-term rentals, and those are mainly golf course communities that had the expectation when they set that community up to have tournaments and allow for short-term rentals during those tournaments in certain planning areas around that golf course. Otherwise, the only other opportunity for short-term rentals currently in the county is through what's called a bed and breakfast. And you actually have to get a special land use approval in order to do that. And in order to do that, you also have to actually reside in the home, and you're essentially just renting out bedrooms, not the entire dwelling. So what we're actually looking at tonight with short-term rentals would be a change in that, and that would be renting out an entire residence short-term to vacationers, traveling nurses, that type of situation. What the commissioners have done at this point so far is they looked at two different options that staff brought back to them. One was a possible zoning resolution amendment, and the other option was a possible ordinance to regulate short-term rentals. And as of right now, they have chosen to move forward to get comment on a proposed ordinance. That's the direction that we've received to this point. In that ordinance, it would actually require a license to operate a short-term rental from your property that you would actually have to apply for and get from the Community Development Department. As part of that licensing process, there's an application, additional exhibits and stuff that you have to provide along with that. It would list certain requirements and standards for that short-term rental, the number of guests that could occupy the short-term rental. We would need information on the septic system. It would have to be in a dwelling that has actually obtained a certificate of occupancy from our building division, things like that, life safety standards. Also, there would be provisions in there that would allow for a license to be denied or revoked or suspended. And if one of those actions were to be taken, then there's also an appeal process where a property owner would be able to appeal that decision to the Board of County Commissioners. There's also provisions in there for enforcing that ordinance, as well as penalties for noncompliance with that ordinance. So that's a fairly good summary of what's currently proposed.
All right. Well, thank you, Michael. Thanks for filling us in on that. Roger,
Just a little bit louder, Commissioner.
just a little bit louder. That is something that has been rarely ever said to me. Hey, Roger, do we have anybody on the phone with a question?
We do. Let's first start with an online question that came in from Carol. She says, I want to make sure you distinguish between STRs, where the owner are not in a residence, versus those like mine, where the owners are in residence. She's never had an issue with a guest due to the fact that she resides in the home and rents my basement apartment.
Yeah, you bet. I think we heard some of that distinction in Michael's presentation that we just heard, in that, the in-home residence short-term rentals that are B&Bs are allowed right now. And so this is a provision that will allow short-term rentals where the owner may not reside, and that would be a temporary rental of less than 30 days. We know this is an emerging area for travel, for tourism, but also for temporary employment situations around the country. And we have heard concerns expressed from the public that this be done right. While at the same time, we're trying to balance requests that we've received from folks who own a second property here in the county and do wish to bring in some income by having a short-term rental situation. That's why we're going with the ordinance option, and with the idea that it'll give us better control so that we can address the concerns that we've heard from the community while still offering this as what I consider to be a property rights issue in our community. Roger, I think you said you had somebody on the phone for us.
We do. Before we take that call, I do want to acknowledge that we're having some streaming problems. So if you are listening online and it's going in and out, we're seeing the same problem here, and our technicians are working on that right now.
Okay, thanks, Roger.
Next up, let's hear from Edward first on the phone. Edward, go ahead.
How are you doing? I also hear the streaming issues. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can, Edward. Go ahead.
My question really is, I appreciate what you're doing. I've listened to every town hall. You guys are doing a fantastic job. I'm puzzled. Why is the government involved in short-term rentals? What is the problem you're trying to regulate or fix? I don't understand why you're involved in it.
Yeah, I don't know that there's a problem we're trying to regulate or fix. Short-term rentals are allowed by law in the state of Colorado. We have heard, like I said briefly earlier, we have heard from our residents who maybe own a second property, and we've heard questions, from folks who they're retirees. One of the first emails I received on this was a lady who resides in the Plum Creek neighborhood of Castle Rock here, and she and her husband are retired. They have had a weekend home, a weekend property in the West Creek area. And she said in the email, they don't get up to it much anymore. They are getting older, they're retired, they don't get around the way they used to, but they would like that opportunity to have that secondary form of income to augment their retirement as they're getting into their twilight years. And I'm sure some of you can understand, maybe you're close to retirement. I'm a couple of years out, and some of you might be retired. And I'd like you to consider the petition we've heard from some of our residents, that this would be a way that would legally allow them to have that secondary income. Commissioner Thomas, I think we have some folks who'd like to ask questions in the room.
Is there anyone in the room that has a question?
You knew I would.
Yes, ma'am. We knew you would.
A short comment, please, and then a proposal, and then a question.
Absolutely.
Short comment is the Franktown Citizens Coalition opposed short-term rentals. They do not want it in Franktown from all the emails I've received. The second thing is, I have a proposal, but I'm going to ask the question first. Should you pass the ordinance, which we hope you don't, and I'll get to my proposal, would that override covenants, bylaws, and deed restrictions to short-term rentals?
Yeah, that's a great question, Mrs. Love. And it is something that is being looked into by our legal staff right now. Our first blush understanding, a covenant between a homeowners association and an individual is a contract. It's just like anybody who's doing a long-term rental right now and a lease. So from that perspective, no, it cannot. It cannot override a covenant, either with a covenant-controlled community or a fully licensed HOA.
The problem is there are many areas, including Franktown, where there are no HOAs. And these are community organizations that don't want the short-term rentals. So what do you do about covenants and bylaws in those areas? For example, Deerfield is a corporation. It's not an HOA. So I don't see anything in this ordinance that protects deed restrictions, covenants, or bylaws at all. In other words, the ordinance, if you don't protect that, may override it, asking for a lot of lawsuits.
My recommendation would be to revise your bylaws for your covenants, and so that they take this into account, because then that gives the neighborhood an opportunity to enforce that measure against the individuals, just like you would any other contract.
I love what you just said, because now we're getting to my proposal,
Yes, ma'am.
which will resolve this issue. My proposal is that back in 2019, county staff developed a short-term rental regulation that a lot of people supported, unfortunately did not get adopted. I'm going to read it to you. Dwellings shall not be used as short-term rentals for occupancy of less than 30 days unless expressly allowed in the zone district, which was your point, or planning area in the planned development where the dwelling is located. This would give every HOA, homeowner association, community the ability and the flexibility to make their own decisions and their own enforcement. Then we wouldn't have to go through what you were just talking about, everybody trying to change their covenants and then enforce them and still deal with the ordinance that may be stronger because it's by state statute. You've got problems if you don't do this. Thank you.
No problem. Very open to it. I don't know, Commissioner Thomas, does that sound like something we should consider?
Well, I think we need to listen to what our residents want. I thought the last time we did a poll on this, there were more opposed to having short-term rentals than having short-term rentals. So I certainly think that we need to listen to our residents and what they want.
Absolutely.
Did you have a phone call?
I do. Let's hear from Ron next. Go ahead, Ron.
Hi, thank you. I'd just like to make a statement. I am opposed to more regulation, more governance, more government. We own our properties, and I believe that, notwithstanding covenants and the like, but areas that aren't covenant controlled, a property owner should have the right to do what he chooses to do with his property, his or her property. I don't believe that the county should be enforcing or making more laws. I think every legislator that comes in, everyone wants to create more laws and more rules and more regulations, and which requires more enforcement. And if there's not a problem, if it isn't broke, don't fix it. If there are people that don't want it, enact your covenants and then let the people within your covenant community have that voice. But I'm opposed to the county having any kind of an oversight or additional regulation for this.
So Michael,
So-
would you like to answer that, please?
Yeah, Michael, could you give us a little, if there was a property owner that was offering a property as a short-term rental right now, outside of the Gulf communities that allow it, what would the county's obligation be?
Our obligation would be to notify them that they are actually in violation of our current regulations. In our current zone districts that allow for, let's say, a single family dwelling, for example, by definition, that dwelling is to be occupied by a family. That's their permanent home. Short-term rentals are not considered a dwelling use. As of right now, our interpretation of our current regulations are that that is a lodging use, and a lodging use is not the same as a dwelling. Therefore, they would not be permitted to have that use.
Yeah, and so what we're attempting to do with this ordinance, and yes, it'll be a new law and it'll be a new regulation imposed by the county, is actually to allow that short-term rental use for that property owner. As I think our caller was attempting to express, this is actually an ordinance that would allow, as opposed to an ordinance that would suppress. As far as the regulation, the purpose of this ordinance is to set a balance, to allow owners who wish to use their property as a short-term rental, allow that, while at the same time addressing the concerns, a little bit of what we heard from Mrs. Love and a lot of what we've heard from other residents, that there be a measure of control, there be a way to strike a balance so that the use is allowed, while at the same time, the concerns in our community are addressed and respected. Abe, you're being prompted, buddy. You're up to bat.
Yeah, well, thank you. And there are a couple of questions that we have both online and one that we had coming in through, it looks like potentially through the phone, I think, if Roger's prompting. But, I just would like to ring in, my colleagues also shared their view around short-term rentals in the conversation we've had. I'll share mine. I agree that it's a balancing. I am a private property rights proponent. And I want to be very real. I think what we saw during COVID and the pandemic were the only thing that some people had were their homes, and being able to use their property in order to generate revenue. And in some cases that kept them afloat, allowed them to survive month to month. I don't want to step in as government and prevent people from being able to use their property. The flip side, which I think Ms. Love articulates so well and others, is it is a balancing with the neighborhood. We have to think about wastewater, noise, light pollution, crime, traffic. All of those things need to be taken in consideration. So it could be contractual, it could be, regulated by what we already have with the sheriff's office, our zoning enforcement. But that's where I'm at. I do see, so it looks like one question that came in online is, what are the current, and I think this one might have been already answered, what are the current opportunities for renting a home to vacationers in Douglas County? I think we've heard that a bit from Michael. So let me jump down. Another one that came in, I want to rent my home on VRBO. That's a popular site. Is that currently allowed?
That would currently be allowed if it's for a period of 30 days or longer, a long-term rental, but not a short-term.
Okay. And another one that we have is, my neighbors rent their home on Airbnb and parking is always an issue. The guests block my driveway. Who do I call?
That would be the sheriff's department for a right-of-way infraction.
Yeah. Okay. Commissioner Teal?
All right. And hey, any other questions in the room? Let's go ahead and I will take this gentleman over on the right. Well, no, we want everybody to be on a microphone just so that everyone can hear your comments and hear your question.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to reinforce the property rights issue for us. And whoever mentioned, I think one of the commissioners mentioned that, this is an income issue, especially for older people. My wife and I are close to the age we're going to start thinking about retiring. We do have some normal apartment rental properties in Colorado. But this is a big income issue for retiring people. So it's going to affect older people more than it's going to affect anybody else. And those that said it's a septic issue versus a traffic issue, it's really not. If you have a 6-month rental with somebody staying at a location, that traffic is no different than 6 1-month rentals. It's no harder on your septic than 6 1-month rentals. Right? The issues really aren't any different. So again, I'm not sure what problem we're trying to solve here, and I'll echo the previous gentleman's comments. We seem to be trying to solve some problems that don't really exist.
Yeah, no, that's actually, when I first heard about this, when we first discussed this as a board, that was something that I was concerned with, that we have this restriction on our property rights here in the county that, why are we doing this to each other? We explored a couple routes, and doing this, again, it's ironic. We have to pass a law in order to make something allowed. Roger, did we have a phone caller?
We sure do. Let's hear from Steve next. Steve, go ahead.
Hi there. Sounds like your IT problem has resolved itself. That's great. Thank you, guys. I'm really enjoying these town halls. This topic strikes a nerve with both my wife and I. Just as a tally here, the Franktown caller notwithstanding, sounds like you're about 5-0 about people telling you to stay in your lane. The previous caller was excellent. You're trying to solve a problem that absolutely does not exist. Mr. Teal, I know you fairly well, and I don't know if it's being tongue-in-cheek, but your last comment was spot on. You're going to make regulation to allow us to do something with our property? We don't need your permission, and quite honestly, no matter what you as county commissioners decide to do, I live in unincorporated Douglas County. I, thank God, do not have an HOA, but those that live under covenant control communities or have HOAs, they can do whatever they want if they want to invoke this regulation. We moved here specifically to be left the hell alone, excuse my French. But I would imagine that most of the complaints you're getting, what's the word the kids use these days, Karens? They're the ones that are complaining. You used an example, Mr. Teal, about some elderly people would like the opportunity. And they're coming to you asking basically your permission. And it goes down to, again, you're going to make regulations to allow us. They don't need your permission.
Steve, thank you for
So
your
I'll-
comments. Do you have any do you have a question?
Well, tell you what,
No,
Steve, it's always great to
it
hear
was a-
from you, buddy. And thank you for monitoring these town halls and participating often. Again, just to clarify, right now, if you try to open a short-term rental, Mr. Carey will likely come and visit you someday. And he will issue a citation for a zoning violation. This ordinance will remove that reason for Mr. Carey and his team to come and visit you for just using your property. Commissioner Thomas.
Yes, and I believe we have an online question. Roger.
We do. This question came in from Andrew. What would the process be to apply for a short-term rental license?
I think we touched on that a little bit in the beginning, but there would be an application form that you fill out. And as of right now, that application would be submitted to the Community Development Department along with any exhibits and additional required documents. And that would be reviewed by planning staff versus the actual ordinance. And if the ordinance is being complied with, the license would be issued. It would be an annual license that would have to be renewed each year.
Thank you. Roger, we have another online question.
We're going to go to the phone, I think, this time. Commissioner, how about we hear from Robin?
Hi there. Good evening, everyone. I, as you made very clear to us in the beginning of this call, live in Parker, and you are not including us, but I live on the western side of Parker. I live a block and a half or 2 blocks till it becomes unincorporated, which means that I have to drive through unincorporated, whether I go through on where Main Street becomes Ridgegate, or I go out to on Chambers and turn left onto the major road out to its side there, and I take that up to the freeway from 2 blocks, a block and a half from my house till we get to I-25. That's all unincorporated. And if you haven't driven through here lately, especially from the other side of this where it bumps into Lone Tree, we have a huge amount of growth going on in this community. Okay, it's all unincorporated, and we only are going to have 2, maybe 3 lanes, depending on how they're making them for us right now on Ridgegate, especially. And that is my husband's route to work. And when somebody else is not used to the neighborhood traffic because they're in a rental and it's not laid down for them, it's going to cause some havoc with people who are either going to speed or go too slow. You have both sides of the coin. And it's going to cause a problem. We already have a problem with people commuting in the morning to get to I-25. We live within the town of Parker, but we utilize unincorporated, and we utilize lots of areas of our county before we even go up to Denver. And
Robin?
When we're along
Robin,
these
thank
routes,
you for thank you. Do you have any
Excuse me, I wasn't
question real
finished.
fast?
I wasn't finished, but if you want to cut me off, I'll make sure you guys don't get my votes then, but that's okay. I was finishing to let you know that when we're on the major routes that are around here, which are unincorporated Douglas County, you need to be aware of what we're driving through. And when people are renting or new or temporary to the area, nobody goes over the rules and regulations of our county, whether it be controlled by a police officer or a sheriff. There are rules that are required of our roads and that they need to follow. And if those are not being followed, then they need to be told to be part of this ordinance or not included. Whatever you're doing, you need to be aware of that. Thank you for letting me finish my call. Have a good evening. I guess you don't care about us here.
Commissioner Layden.
Thank you for that. And for the last caller, thanks for calling in. We have done nearly 70 of these because we do care about each and every one of our citizens that we represent. So thanks for sharing your views. Roger, do we have another phone question?
You bet. Let's go to Mika next. Go ahead.
Good evening. So my name is Micah Shamash. My wife and I have lived here in Douglas County for 19 years, and we moved here for a couple of reasons. One was lower taxes, less regulation, more freedom. Over that time, we've acquired quite a few properties, some of them being short-term rentals. One of them existing in Douglas County. We've operated for 2 years now. We've had over 150 stays, and we've never had one complaint. And I read through your 2 draft regulations, and it looks like just regulation to create regulation for no purpose. If short-term rentals aren't allowed, then put it into the zoning and allow it under the zoning classes that you see fit. I mean, we're currently zoned A1. We have 35 acres. It should be a perfectly legitimate use. We have 2 certificate of occupancies on our property. If that's the problem, then solve the problem with that. Don't solve it with regulations that's going to create a whole other branch of government just for the sake of regulation. That's all I have.
I'll be happy to kind of address that in terms of, we did look at making it allowed use through zoning. And that is still an opportunity we have. The issue that we ran into is that our enforcement capabilities, in order to strike that balance between property, property use versus addressing the concerns that we've heard a few of tonight, is we would not have as strong of regulations by doing it through a zoning amendment. Me actually being a bit of a fan of allowing property owners to use their property as they want to, we still could do this as an amendment to our zoning resolution, and then the enforcement capabilities would be probably weaker, is something that Michael would take umbrage at. However, they will not be as robust, I think is the best way to say it. Commissioner Layden, back to you, sir.
Thank you for that. So, Roger, did you have an online question?
We do. Let's take a question from Diane. She asks, who made it not allowable to start with? Was that voted on?
Wow, that's a good one. Michael, do you have any history on how this has come about that you could share with us?
The only thing that I can share is I think back when the zoning resolution was first drafted, short-term rentals were not a thing at that time. That is, a fairly new concept in the terms of regulations at the county, and using a single-family residential lot for lodging purposes just wasn't something that was envisioned back then.
Yeah, that's kind of the impression that I got too. And so it's sort of, when short-term rentals became a thing for the state of Colorado, it became a part of the code of laws for the state. This was something just not considered here in the county. Before I take a hearing room question, because there's a whole lot of people that have been raising their hands for a while, just a reminder, if you're joining us on the phone, please, and you have a question or a comment, please press *3 on your keypad, and we will put you in the queue and join. So we had people who had hands up to ask a question or make a comment. This gentleman in the black jacket, I think he's the one that's had it up the longest. Sir, go ahead.
My name is Tom. We've had an experience. There's no allocation of protection of water rights and adjacent property owners' rights. There's no process in here when you're taking private property and private resources such as water, et cetera, which is a state regulated issue. That's one item of what's the usage on here. Nobody studied that. I can just tell you right now, there's been some people that we've experienced in the Deerfield area that started a short-term rental, the VRBO, and what did we end up with? It was unregulated. It was a shame and a major impact on the adjacent property owners. We had people trespassing all night, a potent noise that nobody enforces, ordinances. There were just multitudes of issues with short-term rentals. Whereas the 30 days, you'd at least have a period of time of contractual commitment to resolve any issues that develop. With short-term rentals, you have no say what whatsoever. And I see a major impact on trash along the road. They have no buy-in to that property, and to sit there and tell us that people are going to come in for short-term rentals and not impact the adjacent property owners, traffic-wise, trash-wise, noise-wise, light pollution, everything you can possibly imagine. They need to be commercial. I don't understand why we would even consider trying to commercialize private property in Douglas County.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. And yes, having met with you guys out in Deerfield a couple times, I do know definitely the concerns you guys feel. This is your concerns that you just expressed of how do we regulate. That is the reason why we are considering going with an ordinance. As an ordinance, it's a law. And yes, as we've talked about, it allows this use, but at the same time, it gives us the mechanisms to establish what is proper use for short-term rentals, what is allowed, what is not allowed. Furthermore, it allows us to enforce, not so much with Mr. Carey and his team, who can go out and issue a citation, but we can engage the sheriff's department for enforcement as well. And hang on, Tom, hang on. There's other folks. But that's the reason why we're approaching it as an ordinance, as opposed to with the prior caller of why aren't we just doing this as a zoning amendment? It's because as an ordinance, we can address some of the concerns that you just expressed in a more robust way. We can fine violators. And that's probably not the people staying there. That's the owner of the property. We can manage how these are licensed, and then hold the property owner accountable for the conduct of their guests. So that's why we're going with the ordinance, sir, to address a lot of the questions you just had. I'm going to take another question from the audience, and you happen to be closest. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Joe Yaskowig. I don't currently own any short-term rentals, although I do agree that they should be allowed in the county. I guess I don't want to go on vacation anymore because it would turn me into a criminal. And I guess I would figure I would lose my mind on how to drive. But I just pulled up in Franktown alone, and you have 117 choices of just on VRBO alone. So I can tell you that there are people in Franktown that want VRBOs to be legal. So I know that a lot of people don't want them. My question would be, are there going to be a certain number of, I guess, permits for particular communities to regulate the number that can go into a community?
No, that's a really good question. And that is something, I don't think we've really considered that, Michael, in terms of putting in an upper cap on any single community. And we have a gentleman who's giving the feedback to no, don't. And we appreciate that. That's not something we've considered at this time. Commissioner Thomas.
Yes, I understand we have another phone question. Roger.
Let's hear from Elise next. Go ahead.
I'm in Pinewood Knolls, which is, hello, can everyone hear me?
Ken, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm in Pinewood Knolls, which is right next to Deerfield, and Pinewood Knolls just lost their covenants. The covenants have expired. And I absolutely support property rights. So I do disagree with Diana as much as I love her and know her. I think that as individual property owners, we should have this right to rent our property. Now that stated, I have an Airbnb in Florida, and we have to pay the county hospitality taxes. And I am wondering if Douglas County is instituting something like that with this licensure that they're talking about, if there will be taxes that go along with the county's resolution.
Yeah, what a great question. So here in the town of Castle Rock made the decision, and it was when I was still on the Castle Rock Council before I came over as a county commissioner, that they were going to allow short-term rentals, but those short-term rentals were going to be subject to sales tax. And it became a justification for the town as an additional revenue stream. I did check back with Pete Mengers, who is the tax collections manager for the town of Castle Rock, and that tax revenue stream, it's not a going concern. It's not so we haven't seen a rush of short-term rentals here in the town of Castle Rock. the talks that the commissioners have, we have not proposed assigning any special taxation to this. Right now, these short-term rentals, and as you pointed out, would still be taxed as residential. There is no plan right now by the commissioners to go ahead and turn this into some kind of revenue source with a hospitality tax or a commercial tax assessment on these properties. It is something, of course, we could consider. I personally would be opposed. And actually, at this time, under Colorado state law, we could not assess these properties as a commercial tax rate. That would be prohibited under the state of laws of the state of Colorado.
Michael, do you have
Okay,
any
thank you
comments?
very much.
I do. Even if a sales tax is not being proposed as part of this, in Colorado, through state law, you are required to already collect lodging tax for any rental period of less than $30, less than 30 days. And that's state law. That's not from the county.
Thank you for adding that important information, Michael. Roger, we have an online question.
You bet. Dimitri asks, would you please clarify or confirm whether long-term rentals or rentals more than 30 days are being affected by proposed regulations versus no regulations?
No, we are not considering or talking any difference about a rental of 30 days or longer. This is about rentals that are less than 30 days. So thank you for that question. Commissioner Layden?
Thank you so much for that. And, just doing a quick search, there are, 40 VRBO rentals right now in Franktown. And I think part of the awareness we have to have in 2023 is that VRBO is here and Airbnb is here. We need to change with the times, or at least put some guardrails to allow private property rights, but do it thoughtfully in neighborhoods. Roger, do we have a phone question?
Let's go back to the phone and hear from Beverly next. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. I'm a resident of Unincorporated, Douglas County in the Larkspur area. And my question is, we used to do VRBOing with our old house in Florida, and we had to go through a lot of, say, licensing, inspections of our property to make sure that whoever is renting it is going to be safe. And also the concern here would be that we are in a red zone. During the summer, there's high risk of fire, and that there is documentation provided to the residents. Is that a requirement of the evacuation routes and just any other safety protocols kind of thing? We used to have that in Florida for our rentals. Is that being considered, and would that be a separate department, and how would all that be funded?
No, many of those items that you discussed are actually already listed in the proposed ordinance. Funding, I'll turn that over to the commissioners.
Yeah, our intent would be that the license fees that would be assessed on owners who wish to make use of this would cover the additional costs. And of course, you start a new program that's based on a forecast. And so that'd be something that we'd probably be reviewing, if not yearly, then at least every few years, to make sure that indeed, by allowing this program, it's not costing us all extra in our taxes, but it's paying for itself.
Commissioner Layden?
Thank you. So it sounds like we might have another online question, Roger.
We do. Let's hear a question from Karen. She asks, can it be assumed that short-term rentals are not allowed in detached accessory structures?
Currently, that is correct.
All right, Roger, do we have another phone question?
Oops, we did, but mine just went out, so hold on 1 minute. Let's hear from Beverly next. Beverly, go ahead. Well, Beverly's gone. Let's hear from Mitch next. Mitch, go ahead. Sorry, we are having still technical problems. Let's try Trudy.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
we can hear you, Trudy. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. So I just want to confirm that when you live in an HOA community, that the bylaws in an HOA will override any kind of changes in short-term rental permissions.
In an HOA community, the HOA would have to enforce their bylaws in order to prevent a short-term rental if there is an ordinance that would allow them in the county in that zone district.
All right, Roger, do we have another question on the phone?
From Kimberly next. Go ahead, Kimberly. All right, sorry, folks. Let's try Mike. Mike, go ahead.
Hello, does everyone hear me?
Yes, sir.
So, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. As I have a comment rather than a question. We previously lived in a area that allowed short-term rentals, and they were licensed and regulated allegedly, and it was pretty much of a disaster. It ruins your neighborhood. These are commercial businesses. People drive in to inspect the property before they rent it. Then they have a party there. They have a lot of cars. The trash is left out in the road, and it ends up pitting the neighbors against the owner of the property, and it destroys it. You know, we bought our property in Douglas County that is residentially zoned, and that means no commercial businesses. Short-term rentals are commercial businesses and must be accommodated through wider streets like the ladies have talked about and other public services. So it's just, if you are going to do short-term rentals through a regulation allowing these in a residentially zoned area, you need to strongly consider capacity in the rental and rules for safety, the CO2 detectors and other things. But the other thing our area went to was that if they had complaints on that property, their license would have to go to a public hearing for renewal rather than automatic renewal like it usually is. Thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Michael, we have some elements addressed in the ordinance that were discussed. Can you take us through some of those?
Yeah, there's an opportunity if there's complaints on a property and they're continuing to violate to either suspend or revoke the license. And those hearings would actually go before the Board of County Commissioners.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael. So some elements that do address, sir, your concern. Going to the hearing room, and I saw you raise your hand, but he beat you by a couple minutes. Sir, go ahead.
Just a comment on this. I support what Diana Love said and what Homeowners Association of Deerfield said. This regulation is not necessary. But in particular questions, we've had disasters of short term. And you're talking about short term, less than 30 days. Could it be as much as a weekend rental? Could it be consecutive weekends? Could it be consecutive day? We may have a turnover with a lot of people causing a lot of problems, which we've had already. There is no limitations in your regulations on that. I think it should be left up to the governing body whether they're going to have it in their community. Under your regulations, there's nothing to prevent me from renting my property on a daily basis and continuing to do that. There is no limitation as spelled out yet. And there is no liability to adjoining homeowners. There's a lot of questions we have the way you wrote this.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Those are some elements that, let's see what we can do. Very good point.
And Roger, we have an online question.
We do indeed. The question is from Andrew. Who would be held accountable for violations, the property owner or the guests?
It could be both.
There's another phone question.
hear next from Addie. Addie, go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to comment more than question, just that my husband and I are in full support of this. I feel like a lot of the concerns are that this panel is to hurt rather than help. I think, a lot of people, it sounds like, are already doing what they want to do with their property, which is fine, but this is just to make sure that, someone's not throwing up a shack and Airbnb it in our, unincorporated properties. And from personal experience, we've worked with a lot of people on this board. Some of the friendliest people, they're not here to deny an application. They're here to just streamline and make sure that, everyone's safe, and, they're here to help. So if you have questions, they're super informative, and I just wanted to vouch my support for this 100%. And thank this Douglas County panel for everything they've done for us.
Well, okay. Well, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Going back to the room, and this young lady right here, she had snagged me earlier. So, ma'am, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I just want to thank you all. I've been following this, and it really is a difficult issue, and I really appreciate how far you've come with it and listening to all of your citizens and how to approach this. And I really appreciate hearing what everybody's had to say. And I just want to make a comment, and then I'd like to ask sort of some technical questions if the ordinance is in fact stated, and then how you sort of move forward from there. For me personally, I live in unincorporated Douglas County. I live several minutes from the Colorado Horse Park, and I would have a space where I could rent. I would do it it'd be 21 days at a time, just during the summer months, for people who are either working or are competing at the Colorado Horse Park. Because of the way my my property is zoned, I can have 2 horses as well, so people could come with their horses. So, but I'm going to do that in a very responsible way. I mean, this is really where private property hits your community. And for me, it's not just about private property. It's about me being a private property owner within a community of people. So I'm going to consult my neighbors and consult people around me. And if it becomes a problem, I'm going to have to find a different source of income, but I'm willing to give it a try for sure. My technical question is, so let's say you go ahead with the ordinance, you decide, you vote on that. When would the start date, when would you start? And then, I don't know how many applications you're going to get. How are you going to deal with those? There may be a lot of them. And how quickly would you be able to turn them around? And what is the cost?
Okay, Michael, some of that we know. Can you handle some of that? And then just right off the bat, let's take that last question. Have we worked out the cost, the fee schedule, or the license fee schedule?
Not at all.
Okay. Wonder if you could help address some of the other questions.
A lot of those questions are things that are, still need to be looked at by Community Development Department. This is something that was just brought back to the board not too long ago with the idea of doing it as an ordinance. So right now we're still in, the stage of exploring this. We've got a draft ordinance. It's out on referral, but some of those questions that you've asked today, those have not been explored yet.
Yeah, really, we don't necessarily have a hard timeline on this. It's going to take as long as it takes. No need to rush on this one, considering the different opinions we do have in the community. Roger, it looks like you got a phone question.
We do. We were able to get Mitch back, who we tried to bring up, and it didn't work. Go ahead, Mitch.
Hi, can you guys hear me now? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Mitch.
Okay, good. So, the question of how do you police the short-term rental came up earlier, and I wonder if that can just be, if we handled short-term rental the same way as we do the Class 2 home occupations, and also put them in the zoning the same way. Why couldn't we do that? Because a Class 2 business, in my neighborhood, I've got a neighbor that's running a Class 2 home operation that, he's got 2 big buildings. He's running equipment and trailers. And it seems a lot more intrusive than just a car from the airport with a nice couple that comes in, spends a little time here. So I wonder if we couldn't just handle short-term rental in the same manner as we do the Class 2 home occupations. And also, I just fully support doing the short-term rental. I think a lot's been made about people coming into town being reckless and misbehaving and that sort of thing, and it just isn't the case. Most of the people that we have seen in short-term rental have just been kind and very nice people. So again, I fully support it.
Thank you for that comment, sir. Roger, did you have one last online call before we wrap this up?
We do. Let's hear from Scott next. Scott, go ahead.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We sure
Hello?
can. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Sir, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. Yes, I'm a resident in Highlands Ranch and also a realtor, very dialed into the short-term rental community. I work with a handful of investors. I think through one of Trudy's calls, she had mentioned HOAs. I actually shy away from any kind of a townhome or condos because the HOAs do override short-term rentals. So, we have, it sounds like two schools of thought. People want their rights and other people don't want to be disturbed by what this may or may not cause. My question, have you, we're not the first community to go through this. All of the municipalities around Colorado have some way to govern it. Either they do nothing at all or, they have to put something together. Have you reached out to any of the other municipalities just to learn from their mistakes? Because the ones I've worked with, everybody does it a little bit different. And I just curious if how much conversation has gone into visiting with other other communities.
Michael?
Yes, as part of our research for this, we have reached out to other counties and municipalities, and the ordinance that is actually drafted for Douglas County, a lot of that language was borrowed from other jurisdictions. So we're not reinventing the wheel. We definitely have been consulting and collaborating with other jurisdictions.
Thank you, Michael. Roger?
All right, one last quick question online. Michael submitted. He says, the financial interest of the county is self-evident in granting a property right. What is the license fee? I know we don't know that yet. Is there a flat annual fee, or would you be basing it on a percentage of income received? Anything else in excess of a lodging tax? Just really concerned about the financial aspect of this.
Michael?
Yeah, as previously mentioned, we have not looked at fees at all. Fees are established by the board. As Commissioner Teal, I believe, pointed out earlier, they're not looking at this as to make money for the county. They're just looking at recouping the cost of the program itself.
And with that, Mike?
Yeah, just a little extra. I mean, we've talked to other county commissioners around the state. In the ski communities, they are looking at this as a revenue generating source. They are doing a lot of work, and they talk to us a lot about how they can make it into a revenue stream. That's just not our priority. We still have more conversations to be had about this, but at this stage of the game, I think all three commissioners have talked about the fact that we're not looking at this as a revenue source. This is something we'd like to allow and then make it pay for itself.
Commissioner Layton, it's time to wrap up. Would you like to start?
I would. Thank you, Commissioner Thomas. Well, I'm incredibly honored because Douglas County citizens you're smart, you're articulate, you understand the background that you're dealing with. And so I'm really thankful that you brought the questions that you shared, as well as the comments. I can't say I disagree with any of them. And I heard two clear lines of thought. One is maximize private property rights. The second is minimize negative neighborhood impacts. That's the challenge for us as a board, is where is that sweet spot? And I heard some really interesting potential mechanisms for us to do that and hopefully do that well. I'll just share a comment I got from a citizen earlier today that the Super Bowl this year is in Scottsdale. This individual has a short-term rental in that area and is charging $11,000 for that weekend. Now, I don't know if those kinds of prices are happening here in Douglas County, but it would be great if people could use their property to maximize their own self-benefit as a citizen, but then really care for their neighborhood. So continuing to just think about it. Thanks so much.
Well, thanks a lot, Abe. Just to kind of summarize my thoughts, I think about Tom, you telling us about the disruptions that people are doing right now with short-term rentals, and how, and then I don't know that I have a tool to help address your concerns. And then I think about the other comments that we've heard here in the room of people saying, it's my property, keep your hands off, we don't need another layer of regulation. And then I think about something that a caller said, as well as something that my own colleague, Commissioner Layden, pointed out. People are renting their property for short-term rentals right now. And our mechanisms to enforce that ban are weak. The intent here is to maximize the ability of property owners to use their property for this purpose, while at the same time addressing the comments that we have heard today, that we need to be able to have regulations against those bad actors out there. We need to be able to take action and ensure that our neighborhoods stay the neighborhoods we want to live in. That's the balance we're trying to strike, just like Commissioner Layden said. That's the work I'm committing to. And that's the work that I think we'll be doing for the next few months as we work this out. Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you. So it's interesting to hear the two sides that have already been summarized by my colleagues. One comment that did not come up tonight that I have heard at conversations at the state level is the difference in taxing, that we pay a lower tax for a residential home as opposed to what commercial businesses pay. And if a residential home is being used as a commercial enterprise, should the taxing level be different? And so that's another, I didn't hear that today, but I have heard that at state level when we've been having these conversations about the fairness issue for businesses that pay commercial taxes and now are competing with residences that are paying residential taxes. And how should that be considered? So I just bring that up to show the depth of these conversations that we are having, to consider all, including the people who say, I've had bad experiences with short-term rentals, I don't want them next to me, and other people saying, I need this to continue to live in Douglas County. So I hope you have heard that your commissioners are listening to you. And when I made the comment that my decision will be made on what I hear from commissioners, I encourage you, if you did not have a chance to reach out to us tonight, you can go to douglas.co.us/town hall and put your questions and comments there. Thank you, everyone. Good night and God bless.
All right. Thank you, commissioners. On behalf of Douglas County, thank you for joining us this evening. Again, as you just heard, if we didn't get to your question, we invite you to submit feedback at douglas.co.us/town hall. We do apologize for some of the technical difficulties we had tonight, and hope you will join us again for future town halls. Good night.